Getting clean, staying sharp, and protecting your family can feel like a fight that never lets up. One bad influence, one moment of grief, one old contact, or one wrong decision can pull a person back into a place that they fought hard to get out of. But there's another way forward, a way to rebuild your health, strengthen your mind, cut off the people dragging you down, and become the reliable father, husband, friend, and protector that your family needs. Our guest today, Adan Castaneda, brings the perspective of a Marine Corps veteran, recovery coach, and intervention professional who has lived through addiction, mental illness, PTSD, and the hard work of rebuilding. You're going to hear in this episode practical steps for sobriety, fentanyl awareness, building a better fire team, replacing destructive habits, and finding purpose again without pretending the road is easy. Before we get into this episode, though, I want to take a moment to raise awareness for something that I feel is deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians who were impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial will be both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you'd like to learn more or find out how you can support their mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now let's get into today's episode. Hey, Adan, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here.
I appreciate it, sir. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to speak my voice and for other veterans and families out there, and just try to educate others on the fentanyl epidemic. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You hear a lot about it in the news, and different people talking about fentanyl and all that stuff. And when I saw your information come through, and I was like, you know what, this is kind of a big deal, because I know there are some purposes that it's used for. It's obviously a drug that's been developed, but it's gone down the wrong path in a lot of places, and it's been used for the wrong things, and starts to wreak havoc in people's lives across the country. And so this is bigger than just a veteran issue, but it's a veteran issue as well. It affects a lot of folks all over the place. So before we jump into kind of the meat of the episode here, could you start by maybe just sharing a little bit about yourself and your background, kind of a little bit of who you are for anyone who's not familiar with you?
My name is Adan Miguel Castaneda. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. I served in the Iraqi War during 2006-2007 Operation Iraqi Freedom 6. I operated as a scout sniper, got out, used a GI Bill, went to school for cybersecurity. I published a few books, one being my autobiography of my time in the service, how my whole life is like a game of chess, making the right moves, analyzing the chessboard, saving your pieces, your family, your friends, and keeping them safe and winning the game, right? Winning the game with winning strategy and just defeating your opponent. Every day is a day against the reaper, right? Death is always coming after you. So every day you're alive and you survive is a win.
Mm-hmm.
I also went to a program to become a nationally certified life coach, recovery coach, and intervention professional. So, I speak from my personal experience as well as my education on that. And probably a few other things, can't remember. But I've also, well, the main thing is I guess COPS D, if you heard of COPS D, co-occurring psych substance disorder. I've been diagnosed with many diagnoses, but the main ones being schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, as well as PTSD from my time in the service. So.
Yeah, and that's a lot for anyone to have to deal with. And when you start having medications being thrown into the mix, it I imagine just makes things a whole lot more complicated and creates a lot of other issues that maybe are unintended consequences, and we're trying to figure out what the right solution is, and everybody is trying to do the right thing and figure all that stuff out, but it's not always an easy answer. So you talked a little bit about some of the mental illness issue, and started off talking a little bit about the drug situation. Tell us a little bit more about how these challenges kind of shaped your mission to educate folks on the fentanyl epidemic and other stuff that you're working on.
I would say, my experience with mental illness, a lot of mentally ill people turn to drugs, and I've turned to drugs after I got out of the military. It could be from anything. It could be from depression, like if you lose a loved one, that's a big thing. Some families, they lose a loved one to drugs, and then more family members die from drugs because they're depressed, they use
Mhm.
drugs. So it could be a combination of, like, poverty, low education, genetics, and just having that tendency to, lean towards, drug use. Hollywood glamorizes
Mhm.
it. So like Hollywood, you see a lot of stuff on the news or like movies and stuff like that where they glamorize drugs, people want to party, get high. So, I kind of wanted to, feel good, feel better. Some people deal with childhood trauma. So childhood trauma, and, they turn to drugs to feel better, or they become alcoholics, and, because they've had not really much joy in their lives. So they try to make themselves feel better
Sure.
and induce that. So with mental illness co-occurring, both happening at the same time, drugs exacerbates mental illness. So if you're like predispositioned to mental illness, if it runs in your family or you have it, doing drugs exacerbates that and multiplies it, enhances it. So you might hear voices. People can hear voices on like LSD, or heavy dissociatives like PCP, or even weed. Like some people get psychosis, like cannabis induced psychosis. So it shaped the way it shaped how I want to help others is because I've struggled with it. I struggled with my sobriety. I'm 40 years old, so it took me like the past 10 years to really buckle down and start getting my life together, diet, exercising, hitting the gym as much as possible, going to school, training, become a workaholic, keeping myself busy as much as possible on productive things that can benefit my life and support my family, take care of my loved ones, and just be a positive influence in the community and society. Try to contribute to my local church, the community, to the chess club, going to archery ranges, taking some flight lessons, traveling, seeing the world, all these things. And I want to speak to others on, them being able to, improve their lives. But if they're struggling, I have free training on YouTube and Patreon and my website, therecoveryprotocol.org, where it's just me speaking. But I also have a bunch of notes, and those are paid, but all the speaking, all the information is free. Content is free. But like for instance, there's a 2,500 bucket list. Now, a lot of people who struggle with depression or mental illness or drug addiction, they don't see their future. They don't see what kind of future they could possibly have. So I have an American Dream edition, like living the American Dream, a lot of possibilities to get there, career, family, and staying disciplined, motivating, hold each other accountable. But the 2,500 bucket list, all these things you could do, travel, do all these things, hobbies, chess, archery, like flight lessons, getting a new career, taking care of your family, building your network and circle of friends, being a positive influence in the community, speaking at church, hosting events, all these things you can do to just, 2,500 things. And you can use AI to even, build 10,000 things you could do, a whole lot more, just to be a positive influence in the world. I went to my niece's graduation, and one of the valedictorian, whatever it is, like the main
Sure.
speaker, mechanical engineer, one of their main speeches was like, anyone listening to this, anyone in the world has the power to change the world, right? And then Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in the world." Right? You have the power. Anyone has the power. Whether you're a high school graduate, whether you're still trying, even if it's one person at a time, like Mother Teresa helping one person at a time, right? So I just try to speak my voice and help others from my experience.
And that's great. And that's honestly, part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is to share your experiences and share the ups and downs and the things that you've gone through. Because, like you were saying, sometimes people who maybe are suffering from depression or some other mental illnesses or some other issues that they might be going through may not be able to see that there is a future ahead that does have a better outcome than whatever's going on right now. If you're suffering with depression and everything seems like all hope is lost and everything is just terrible day after day, you don't even want to get up and get out of bed, or take a shower and put your clothes on and put one foot in front of the other and do any of the things that a lot of people do in day-to-day life. uh, you kind of just feel like, what's the point? And let's just give up and not continue forward with this. But in your case, you're sitting here showing that there are things. You came up with a list of 2,500 things, and that's just scratching the surface of things that people can do to make an improvement in their life, or to find some sort of joy or happiness in their life. And you know take a look at that list. If none of those things, by some chance, none of those things happen to work for you, like you said, go to AI, a chat GPT kind of thing, and plug it in there, and just keep asking it for more and more different activities that you can plug in there, and eventually you're going to find something. And it's sometimes it's a mindset thing though too. You have to be in that right mindset and want to accept some sort of change, and accept that it doesn't have to be this way all the time. We can make a difference, we can make a change in our lives, but we have to actually want to make that change. And so sometimes you might look at a list and say, oh, you know what, all that 2,500 things, none of those things sound interesting to me, and none of those are things that I want to do. Well, that might be something you have to look internally and say, why is none of those things looking like they would be interesting? Is it because you don't want them to, or is it because they're really not interesting? I got to imagine somewhere in a list of 2,500 things, you're probably going to find something that could be interesting if you want it to be. But if you're just going to be a stick in the mud and not accept that there are some things that you can do differently, of course you're not going to find anything. But if you want that change and you're out there searching for it, yeah, it's out there. And programs like the recovery protocol that you were just talking about, your program there, that's a key part of figuring this stuff out, is stepping outside and doing something different than what you normally do. And I think this is an important piece, and I'd like to dive a little bit more into the recovery protocol, and kind of what you do with that, how it's maybe different from other programs, and how you've seen it transforming folks as they go through it.
Okay, the recovery protocol I developed not too long ago, just a few months, kind of like maybe 3 or 4 months ago. But I guess it starts off with disconnecting from your drug dealers, right?
Hmm.
Just to get back to one of your points, so like having motivation to do anything. Like my case manager, I'll tell you a story. She said, if you have kids, especially if you have a little baby or a little daughter, a little son, you have this little person looking back at you, depending on
Yeah.
you to survive, to live, right, to take care of it, until it can take care of it on its own, kind of like so if you have, and you're going to have that motivation, you're going to have that push and that drive to not fail. You cannot fail. Failure is not an option, right? You're going to do something. You're going to figure something out, and you're going to make money somehow. You're going to work, become a plumber, electrician. Like I just started looking at car salesman. Anyone can become a car salesman. CarMax is great for veterans. CarMax is nationwide. CarMax, you can work part time. CarMax, you could be a master auto mechanic, a master mechanic technician, right? Making like 80 to 100 grand in like 2 to 4 years, you can become a master technician. So, anyone can do anything. They get their hands dirty 8 hours a day, 4 hours a day, whatever you can do, full time, part time, become a car salesman for women if it's too much labor to become a mechanic. Even Starbucks, right? Starbucks and Walmart have a college program, right? You could go to college, they'll pay for your bachelor's degree. You work at Starbucks, probably part time. Walmart, they give you time to do online classes, and you could get a bachelor's degree and do anything. Become a social worker, become a teacher, an educator. You could do anything.
Yeah.
Anyone can do anything. Just gotta put the work in. If you have a baby depending on you, you're not going to fail. You're going to drink a little bit of coffee, get off of the drugs, right? So the recovery protocol, you might have to switch your drug. You have to develop a new habit. So you have this habit. I had this habit like when I was a drug addict for many years, alcoholic and everything, mixing drugs and alcohol, getting just wasted all the time. But you have to develop this new habit because all habits are like hand to mouth. Taking pills, smoking weed, drinking alcohol, hand to mouth, so smoking cigarettes. So you need to start drinking more water. Make that a habit. Get some Gatorade, Propel. Mix it with electrolytes, and just tea. I drink tea and then coffee to stay caffeinated, have some energy, work, be productive, have mental energy. And it's also about dieting. Once you eliminate bread and sugar, like bread's a big one. It converts into sugar. It stores into like your liver converts it. It stores into fat. It clogs up your arteries over time, leads to heart disease. So I've eliminated bread completely. No bread, no tortillas. I've eliminated all added sugars. You don't want added sugars. That just turns into triglycerides, clogs up your arteries. I don't eat out. I don't eat greasy foods from restaurants. I don't, eat any of that greasy food, greasy hamburgers, none of that. Trans fat has trans fat, clogs up your arteries, saturated fat. Stay away from all that. Chicken and fish, right? Low sodium. Low sodium, because even sodium can be bad for you. Raises high blood pressure, bad for your kidneys. Low sodium chicken, I get at Whole Foods. Eat some low sodium chicken and fish, right? Salmon. Eat fish 2 to 3 times a week. It's good for your brain and your heart. Get on a really good diet. I eat black beans, has complex carbohydrates, cleans you out, has a lot of fiber. And I just eat vegetables and salads pretty much. And that's my diet for the most part. And tea and coffee, like salads, vegetables, fish, chicken, and that's pretty much it. And like walnuts, pistachios, and almonds, right? Walnuts, pistachios, and almonds. Those nuts also reduce LDL, the lipo density, lipo whatever protein, whatever that is,
Hmm.
cholesterol. It's good for your high density cholesterol, but bad for your low density lipoproteins, however you say it.
Sure.
But so you could get on an extreme, like extreme strict diet, exercise, do push-ups, cardiovascular, walk around the block, free exercise. You don't need a gym membership, but I have a free gym membership. I walk a mile every day, at least 1 or 2 miles, right? Cardiovascular, good for your heart, good for your brain. It's going to help you think more clearly because that blood flow is circulating to your brain better. You're going to make better decisions, be motivated. So number one, flush your stash, right? Recovery protocol, flush your stash, flush it, get rid of it, change your phone number, delete your social media, and if you have to, leave the city and the state, right? Never contact your drug dealers again. They won't find you on social media. They can't hit you up. They can't text you, and that's going to protect you psychologically and spiritually from these drug dealers. Like if I said, I'm a drug dealer and I'm going after your kids and I'm selling fentanyl and they're going to die. And I'm telling you this as a father. And so, like, you're going to be like, what the hell? You're going to call the cops. Your adrenaline's going to spike. My kid's in danger. There's predators lurking on the street. There's drug dealers out there, MS-13, cartel, drug cartel, all these gang members, and they're selling kids drugs and they're dying in schools. They're dying on the street, young teenage adults, young adults, even elderly. So, you have to be able to, as a father, as a parent, be protective of your children, right? Be involved in their lives. You could get an app, like there's the Citizen app. If you heard of the
Hmm.
Citizen app, it's very popular. You can get a protect mode, protect agent mode. You could pay 5, 10 bucks for the month. And when the kid like is going to school or from work, they could be on live call with an agent and they'll monitor them for distress. If they scream or call for help, they'll send cop, EMS, ambulance, anybody like a cop to go to their situation, GPS tracking, and help them if they're in
Oh,
danger.
wow.
So there's things you could do to protect your family, and obviously being involved, speaking to them, being like a life coach, being a coach to your family, like as a father to your son or daughter, or to your cousin, or to a close friend. Speaking to them, being in their ear, every other day, every day, as much as you can, to get them in the mindset they need to change, right? They need to get clean. They need to make a concrete decision. I'm never going to do drugs for the rest of my life. I don't care if a family member dies, like everyone, that happens to everybody, but I have to be the rock and I have to be strong for my family. I'm going to feel sad, depressed, but a lot of people use because they lose a family member, they get depressed,
Hmm.
right? Or mental illness. I'm never going to use no matter how bad I feel. I have to be strong. And so, like, the main thing, another thing I teach is like being a guardian angel, right? A guardian angel. And I have these cards I pass out. If you could see these,
Sure.
this is my grandmother gave me this guardian angel card. But, a man or woman, like a father, brother, sister, anyone can be a guardian angel, a protector, right? You're a survivor. If you've survived drugs, you're still alive. You have to be a protector. When I go out in the community, HEB, Walmart, Target, wherever the mall, I consider myself, if something happens, I will try to be a protector. If I see something, I have to protect them. I'm an ex-vet. I'm in the military, right? So I have the strength. And as a man, if you have the strength to protect women and children, they're physically weaker. So if something happens, you can help them. There was a school bus that got in a car accident. Someone hit a school bus in an intersection where I live. I went over there. I recorded it, saw if any kids needed help. I reported it to the news, to the police. There was another dump truck that took a turn too fast, turned over, and we had to give him a knife because his seatbelt malfunctioned. He had to cut himself free. And then I try to help him up. I climbed up there. He got down. I went back in, got his phone, got his wallet, whatever. He had to call his boss or whatever. But I would have been able to help him. So you have to be strong. You have to stay fit. You have to be competent and sober 100% of the time. If something happens in the middle of the night, you have to be strong. You can't be all hungover. You can't be on drugs. You can't be drunk. You have to be sober and competent to be able to stop an invader, a home invasion. If something happens out there on the street, you have to be competent enough to call the cops, talk to your neighbors, coordinate, and be reliable, dependable person in the
Yeah.
community. Someone get to be on this person. They don't do drugs. They don't drink. They're always competent, sober. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. You
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And that you hit on a lot of great points there. And through other conversations I've had with folks who have struggled with addiction, they've said a lot of these same things, who've maybe come out on the other side, they've cleaned themselves up and, they turn their life around and everything. A lot of the things that you're talking about are very similar to the things that I've heard from other folks. One of them being leave the area that is, you know, that you associate with whatever the drug is that you've been using. If one guy I talked to, he moved from, I think it was Arizona, up to like Salt Lake City or something like that, because he was like, the people that he was hanging out around, all his friends, his family, they all were using drugs in Arizona. And he's like, I need to break this cycle. I need to get away from this. And every time I hang out with these people, I find myself always just gravitating back towards using the drugs. So let me just move to a completely different area. I don't know anybody up there. I'm going to start fresh, and I'm going to do everything over up there. And he found ways to stay clean up there because it just took him out of that environment. Even soldiers from the Vietnam era who were over in Vietnam, a lot of them, they'd get into stuff over there that they'd come across. And people who never used drugs before ever in their life, they would be over there and they'd be using some sort of drugs, whatever it was. And then they'd come back home, back to wherever they came from, and they'd stop because they're out of that environment. They took themselves out of that environment. In this case, the military moved them back, to home or wherever they were from, and they no longer had that craving or that urge to do that. So that's a good first start. If you can't seem to get away from the drug dealer, the friends who are always partying and doing all that stuff, like, just move. And it's a big country. You can find a lot of places to go, and you can figure that out pretty easily. But another thing you mentioned too is something else that I've heard from folks is finding. I'll put it this way. This may not be the best way to phrase it, but find a new addiction. Find something else that you can replace that drug, that chemical addiction, with something like something more positive, like a physical activity. Whether it's going to the gym and working out, and that type of thing, that could be super healthy for you by replacing it with that, and just go all in on that. Or get into running, or doing marathons and that kind of thing. Other people have found that those types of activities were able to replace the negative addiction. That I mean, no addiction maybe is really all that great, but the healthier ones, the ones where you're improving yourself, I think is okay. Like that, I don't see really much problem with that. If you're going to the gym and all that, and you're still able to function and do your job, or take care of stuff at home, all those things are, I think, only going to improve by having yourself in a better mental state, a better physical state. And even some of those things that you talked about, like being able to take care of your family. If you're always using drugs or alcohol or whatever, and you're not in the right state of mind, and something happens, whether it's at home or you're out with your family, or you're doing something, you're not going to be the best version of yourself. You're not going to be that protector like you're talking about. You're not going to be able to help that person who was in that vehicle that turned over, or help protect your kids against someone who might want to do them harm or something. So think about, like, do I want to be the best version of myself, or do I want to be someone who is basically just wasting their life away by continuing to do these types of drugs? And I think, especially when you look at the other people who depend on you, and quite frankly, it could be anybody who could depend on you. Like the guy in the vehicle that flipped over, they all were depending on somebody coming to help them out. The kids on the bus, the vehicle that flipped over, like, those things, people need to be able to count on other folks. And the military has given us a way of being able to be that person to go out and help people, whether it's with physical injuries or anything like that. Like, we are kind of the defenders or the protectors. Even after the uniform comes off, it's not like we forgot how to do those things. Maybe we don't have as much practice, but we can still do them. And so I think all those points that you said are excellent points. Even the diet and the exercise, and things like that. I think those types of things help contribute to not only the physical well-being, but overall the mental well-being for folks who are struggling with whatever it is that they may be dealing with, whether it's drugs, alcohol, that type of thing, right?
Correct, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Um, and with the diet, like, I also take a whole lot of vitamins. I take nootropics, lion's mane for brain preservation, memory, nerve support, and they're like vitamin D for women. They're more prone to like certain types of cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, even men colorectal cancer, like colon cancer, all these prostate cancer. So all these cancers, some of them can be like well prevented with nutrition. Vitamins, because if some of these like vitamin D can prevent up to 17 different types of cancer. Vitamin C is selectively kills cancer cells, right? I had a captain in the Marine Corps I met at a hospital, Charles State Hospital. Captain in the Marine Corps, he had thyroid cancer. They gave him dual therapy, like half chemo, half injection of vitamin C. They can actually give injections of vitamin
Mhm.
C, like it's prescription grade. So like some people, that's how important like vitamin C, vitamin D, these vitamins can be. I also take other they're called nootropics for like if you're a heavy if you have brain damage from drug use, you can use peptides. I learned about peptides recently. And if you ever heard of peptides, it's very new. Like insulin is really a peptide. It's been around for a long time. But peptides, there's what's called NADs, which is good for like cognition. They have some for sleep. They have some for skin. They have different peptides for different things. But NADs are for, I believe, cognition. So you get a shot maybe in the belly, like in a fat area or wherever they decide to put it, and then you get one or two shots a week, I believe, and it can be kind of expensive. But if you struggle with like memory damage, cognition impairment, deterioration, sometimes nootropics and peptides can kind of help bring you back and restore brain functioning. So that's more extreme, and obviously there's risks. There's risks. It can exacerbate maybe some cancer cells, like some of these. There's some risk if you have a family history of cancer, maybe. But you have to look at all the pros and
Mhm.
cons and see if it's the right thing for you. Also wanted to say before I forget, with the fentanyl stuff, that stuff gets imported from India and China mainly, and then it crosses the border, not just Mexico, but also the northern border, Canada, right? That's how the smugglers will get it in India and China. So like when a drug dealer in America, he'll look at the dark web. He goes on the dark web and he'll see like an ounce of fentanyl for $300 or $400, very cheap. Maybe like after it gets shipped in the post office mail, it's maybe $400 total. So at that $400 he can turn into $100,000, 100K, 100 grand. So that's their incentive. The money's a financial, thing. And whenever anyone buys, any of these drugs, not only they're supporting the drug dealer, but that money trickles to the cartel
Mhm.
leaders, the cartel. And anyone who buys drugs on the street, they're funding cartel operations, which is, attacking women and children, dismembering, innocent people, women with like, getting killed with machetes and baseball bats from MS-13 gang members. That's happened here in America. There's all sorts of the Sinaloa cartel. There's the CJNG cartel. Their cartel leader was killed recently in February. I believe February 22nd, the CJNG Cartel Jalisco New Generation. That's one of the most ruthless cartels in the world. And they're responsible for dismembering like women and children, families, killing them in front of their families, killing cops, killing government officials in Mexico. And they're responsible for the heavy fentanyl epidemic and drugs, fentanyl being smuggled in
Mhm.
America. So when 70,000 to 100,000 Americans are lost from fentanyl and drug overdose, that was the CJNG cartel, the Sinaloa cartel, the Zetas, all these different cartels out there, and we're stopping that. So we're stopping some of these border drugs being smuggled in at the border. We're catching some of them, but education and awareness, right? It's sad because parents who've already lost a child, they feel motivated, and their new purpose in life is to educate other families because they've already lost a
Yeah.
child. But they do go to schools, and education and awareness is working. Like the youth, younger generations, they're learning from education and awareness. You have to be more aware of what's out there and more opportunities out there, and just staying away from bad influences on the street. So they're learning at a young age, which is helping, but it's fentanyl still being smuggled in. So I try to think the main ways is like a mindset, positive network, positive fire team. My team leader said, I hope I can remember them, but four things to keep veterans alive. And this can work for civilians too, right? Stay away from drugs and alcohol, because you do drugs and alcohol, that's what veterans are drinking, committing suicide, or making car accidents and all
Mhm.
that. Exercise. The second thing is exercise. Exercise, having releasing endorphins, getting a good sweat, getting in shape, being strong, having that discipline like karate, kung fu, or boxing, having that discipline mindset, psychological resilience, psychological strength, physical strength. It ties in together. And then the third thing is having a good network, a good fire team. That could be your family, your friends, your network, other veterans, a good fire team. So that's, your friends and family. and other veterans, your brothers and sisters, your comrades. And the fourth thing is go hunting. Hunting, right? Getting out there, peace, wilderness, living off the land, and that gets you back. You're a veteran, right? Every veteran, Marines, soldiers, riflemen first, right? So get out there, get an animal, live off the land, obviously eat it, feed it to your family, get out there, one with nature, peace, and get back in touch with yourself. Um, and so those are the four things
Yeah.
that can help. So
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the hunting thing because it's not something I would have thought would have fit into this. But as you're talking, I've thought of some hunting trips that I've gone on and the the hunts that I've done, and just how all the other noise just kind of goes away because you're focused on the hunt. You're focused on the other people who are maybe hunting with you, and you want to make sure that you know where they are located so that you're not accidentally going to shoot them as an animal comes in between you and them. You don't want to miss and accidentally hit someone, so you're paying attention to all that. You're paying attention to what's going on in the present moment. You're listening to the sounds to hear, is there an animal approaching, is animal moving away from you or whatever. You want to pay attention to all the things that are going on around you, and all that other noise, all that stuff from life. It just kind of, I don't want to say it disappears, but it quiets down, and you're focused a whole lot more on the the current moment, and you're focused on that hunt, and it's you know almost like those situations where anyone who's been deployed, you're scanning around and you're paying attention to all the things that are going on, because quite frankly you do have a lethal weapon in your hands, and you don't want to hurt any of the people that you're with, that you might be hunting with. And so you're really paying attention to what it is that you're doing and what they're doing, because you don't want to be in that wrong position either. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, but at first I was trying to see how that fit, but then it kind of makes a whole lot of sense now that I'm thinking about it. Like hunting is a great way to do some of the stuff that you were just talking about, and I think that's a perfect addition to that list, that those four things that you just mentioned there. And and I think another thing that type of activity, and all those activities that you mentioned, another thing that does is it keeps you away from those other bad influences. The drug dealer that might live in your neighborhood, or the friends that you might have who like to party too much, or just those types of people. You get away from that environment and you go hang out with the people who enjoy physical fitness, and they enjoy getting out into nature, and whether it's hunting or not, just getting outside and being out there, and not you know wasting that experience on drugs and whatever else that you might be doing. It's a good replacement for those other things, I think. With all the bad stuff that we have going on in our cities and towns and everything, there's a whole lot of good too that you can do too. You just have to kind of seek that stuff out, right?
yes, sir. It's great. It's more physical, and for the mental challenge, like the professional, the gentleman, right, wearing a suit and tie, chess tournaments, right? I did a chess
Yeah.
tournament. I participated in some chess tournaments. Get good at chess. You could get some play chess for free on chess.com, and you could get very affordable training. I think it's like $10 a month. And you could start going to tournaments. You get like this, I guess, a membership, and then you play. You shake, other members' hands, opponents, learn, get better, learn tactics, strategy, and it really develops the prefrontal cortex of the brain, executive function, decision making. For teenagers and kids, even, and even adults, it can help make them make less risky decisions, because once the prefrontal cortex executive functioning is strengthened, they're going to make less risky decisions. Studies have shown, I believe, that there's some significant changes in the brain to where they won't speed as much, they won't do reckless driving, less likely to do drugs. They're involved in a mental, I guess, game that you have to use intelligence, aptitude, intellect, memory, cognition, concentration, attention. It helps build memory because you have to memorize past moves, you have to understand past strategies, and you have to analyze
Mhm.
patterns to make winning moves and winning strategies. So life is like a game of chess. When you see life as a game of chess, I've written a book, autobiography called Chess Perception, about my time in the service, my whole life in jail, psych wards, childhood, military, making the right moves, winning the chess game. Like I said before, every day you win, every day you stay alive and keep your family alive is a win against the
Yeah.
reaper, right? So, and it's about, just winning the game, keeping your family members alive, healthy, safe, and that's kind of like the battlefield is the world. It could be your neighborhood, the community, the battlefield, the chessboard, right? So life is kind of like a game of chess. And once you kind of play on that level, you'll understand, look, there's a drug dealer over here. That's the enemy. We need to do something, get a restraining order, call the police, use the citizen app, make some reports, a lot of police reports. You have all these police reports on record. Then they'll have this, drug dealer, on record, pictures, license plate. They'll know who this person is. Contact the FBI if you have to. Keep going to higher and higher levels on the chain of command, right? And get this drug dealer where he belongs, rehab, prison, wherever, off the street, because they're gonna kill some people.
Yeah.
They're psychopaths. I'll tell you a story. I consider this guy a psychopath, right? I was at the hospital for, mental treatment, psychiatric treatment, and it was court ordered. I met this guy there, didn't even sell me drugs, but I knew him, thought he was a friend, thought he was just mentally ill, whatever. But a couple of years later, hit me up on Facebook, which is social media, and wanted to hang out. I was in a bad state of mind. I purchased some drugs from him, and I could have overdosed and died. Pretty much blacked out, had trouble breathing, had to go to hospital, get a shot. They kept me there for a little while. So, anyone can easily lose their lives from someone, a friend, a supposedly friend, someone who's close to you, someone you're like, oh, I know this person, I can trust them. You can't trust anyone selling drugs. You're already breaking the law. They don't know what's in it. It could be a bad batch. It could be laced with anything. They could be laced with, any drug. They could rape you, kill you, whatever. So there's people that have used drugs to rape and kill their victims. John Wayne Gacy, there's like Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer. Some of these serial killers, like notorious serial killers, use drugs to disable and subdue their victims. Then they rape and kill them, right? And it still happens to women at bars. Women at bars sometimes get their drinks spiked,
Hmm.
and that's a drug. And then they go, sometimes they disappear or get abducted. They're lucky if they just got raped and they're still alive, because sometimes they just disappear, get into the sex slave trade, whatever, and or they, get killed and just left in the woods or whatever.
Sure.
So once they disappear, they're abducted, they disappear, they're MIA, missing in action. You're probably dead, and it's sad to say, but so drugs, you have to be real careful. Never leave your drink unattended anywhere at a bar. Never leave your drink unattended, right? Just take it with you everywhere. Don't drink it if it was left unattended. Just leave it, buy a new one, whatever. And I don't even put myself in those environments. So just I guess be aware of these things, and that's what I'll say on that before I lose my train of
Yeah,
thought.
no, those are great points because especially for the point that you were making with someone who was a supposed friend who said, "Hey, I got come do these drugs or whatever, and let's party, hang out, whatever." Someone who's willing to get you into that situation, where you're using drugs now. I really couldn't consider that person a real true friend because, like, a friend should be kind of like a battle buddy who is going to be there and looking out for you, making sure that you're safe, making sure that you're taken care of, making sure that the things that could potentially harm you are the risks are being mitigated. And if there's someone who is going to get you some drugs that, like you said, you don't know if it's a bad batch or if it's got something wrong with it or whatever, even if it's 100% exactly what it's supposed to be, it's still not good for you, and they're just going to lead you down that wrong path, and it's not worth it. And so why would you consider that person a friend, going forward, if that's the type of thing that they're going to do? They know it's illegal. They know that it's going to potentially get you in trouble, and if you're hanging out with that person and just accepting, like, oh yeah, this person's a good guy or whatever, and they're not going to do anything to hurt me, at least not intentionally. Well, you never know. I mean, maybe they will. Maybe the drugs have gotten to them and they're doing something a little crazy, or maybe they didn't know and they didn't necessarily want to hurt you, but here we are. And now, a situation like you were in where you're having trouble breathing, you have to go to the hospital, all that kind of stuff. That's never a good situation to be in. And, you know, a person I wouldn't consider that person a good friend because they put you in that kind of situation. I know accidents happen, and on occasion friends will hurt other friends unintentionally, but you got to know that when drugs are involved, like, it's going to be not a matter of if you're going to hurt that person. It's just a matter of when, and it's just not worth it. So And I think all of these things, looking back at all the things that we've talked about in this episode, everything from ways that you can kind of mitigate some of these risks, whether it's leaving the area that you're in or finding new habits to get into something, a little more productive, a little more healthy, changing your eating habits, like you said, you've changed all your diet and nutrition, all that stuff around, versus going out and eating the stuff that will slowly kill you too. The greasy foods and the all the other stuff that a lot of times we just find it as the easier option. So that's what we go into. And yeah, it's easier to just keep taking the drugs maybe in some cases. It's easier to just do that, but sometimes you have to do the hard thing to get to the right place. And I think that's a big takeaway for really anyone who's listening to this episode, veteran or not, because unfortunately these things affect everybody, regardless of your military service or your whatever. These drugs and these ways of life, these lifestyles, they're out there constantly. And it's a battle that you always have to be fighting against, especially like you were saying before, if you have kids or other loved ones who might be more prone to getting involved with that type of thing, especially during periods of grief or loss or things like that, where people might turn to something like a drug to maybe just numb the pain. And that's not the best way to do it. Sometimes the best way through is to just experience that pain and deal with it and learn from it and grow with it, and move past it that way, instead of just trying to shut it all out. I know it might sound like it's easier, but long term, it's not going to help anything. So, a lot of great points here that we've made. Anything else that you would like to share with the audience? Maybe anything else about your program, and maybe compared to other programs that are out there for folks, as far as like other rehab or detox centers or things like that. Any anything for folks who might be struggling right now or have loved ones maybe who are struggling, any kind of advice or words of encouragement that you can offer to them?
Well, my recovery coaching, compared to, to your first point, compared to the programs out there, have free content, which can save lives. It's a lot cheaper. I start at $50 a month and $150 a month for one-on-one coaching. A rehab, traditional rehab, is at approximately $30,000 a
Mm,
month. After, if you have insurance though, then it could be like $2,000 to $7,000 deductible, I believe. That can still be pretty pricey for a lot of
yeah,
people. So cost is a big one. And also, I stick around for more than 30 days. Rehab's like 30 days for the most part. You can stay longer, but average is 30-day stay. And mine, I will stick around. I can stick around for years as long as I'm alive. Keep playing chess, Tetris, all these, brain activity games. Keep on giving any positive words of encouragement, advice to, anyone on my Discord. And maybe I'll just make free content. Maybe I won't get a whole lot of people signing up because money's the issue. But, holding them accountable, being a battle buddy, and talking to them as a veteran, as a 40-year-old, speaking from more experience and hopefully wisdom, and trying to, keep them clean. Another thing, some other facts I wanted to throw in there is since 1999, the year 1999, over 1 million, I think 1.3 or 1.4 million Americans have died from fentanyl and drug overdose since 1999. So that's a lot. So that's why my main point is, like, whenever anyone who's thinking of drugs or doing drugs, anyone who's struggling right now, it's like, and a piece of advice would be, you have to think about this as a life and death
yeah,
situation. This drug could be the last line I ever do. This drug could be the last time. It could just spiral me downwards into a descent to where I never work my way back
yeah,
up. So you can ascend upwards. You have to get clean, ascend upwards, career. And really, the way to ascend upwards, in my mind, some people don't like this, but it's about living the American dream, right? I believe, living the American dream. You see my background, red, white, and blue, stars and all that. I painted that. I'm very patriotic to where I believe, family, spouse, wife and kids, whatever you can afford, a house, white picket fence, a dog, one or two dogs. That's the American dream. A good job, right? A good job in a vehicle, right? Symbolizes freedom, all that good stuff. So living the American dream, having a family and a place to support them and raise them. And, some people, is difficult for them to, I guess, have
mhm,
direction and guidance. They say that direction is more important than speed. So you have to have a moral compass, know what direction you want to take, And it's more important than speeding in a direction that is going to end you up in a grave, an early grave, or in jail or prison or psych ward or
Yeah.
whatever. So having a good direction, having a good mentor. You need a good mentor. It could be a coach. Go to rehab, recovery.com. Recovery.com is, has a bunch of lists of recovery detox centers. My content's free. You can try it out. If you don't like it, go to recovery centers. If you have insurance, that's great. I hope it really works out. Another thing I'll say is anyone struggling with finances or finding a good program, there's faith-based programs, Christian programs. I got this dog tag which has a cross on it from a program called You're My Strong Tower. It's yourmystrongtower.com. There's actually thousands. There's, I think, about over 3,500, 3,500 faith-based recovery programs, Christian-based, Catholic. I think most of them are probably Christian. So these are places where the addict can stay there for maybe a year. I'm sure there's different time frames, but You're My Strong Tower is a 12-month based recovery program where they teach the Bible. They help you work on woodsmanship. It's where you're cutting out crosses like carpentry, and then you might be making these necklaces or somehow. And they use the money to support the addicts. Gives them a year to recover, find work, find purpose, take care of their family, recover, get clean. And they've helped maybe like a few thousand people. It can be expensive for, I guess, the churches. They use their funds to pay for it, and they're free. Some of them are free. So faith-based recovery programs, because recovery programs like detox or these hospitals, when I've been to the hospitals, they don't focus on this diet or exercise or doing archery or doing something mental activities like playing chess. They don't really motivate you. They don't guide you. Like, you stay here, you can watch TV. They might have some yoga classes. The recovery programs might be different, but the hospitals I've been to, they don't stick with you long term. They don't focus on like strict diet, strict exercise, finding employment, being a car salesman, a mechanic, aviation mechanic, going to college, sending you to programs, sending you to Starbucks or Walmart where you could get paid education, paid bachelor's degree. They'll pay for it. They have programs to where you get free education. So, I don't think they have all that information. I try to be a resource hub and, a resource forum and give as much information as I can to help them. Even if it's free, just lead them in the right direction. Look, you need to get educated, stay out of trouble, leave the streets, get clean, leave the neighborhood, leave the city, state, disconnect social media, change your phone number. It's a life and death situation. Go to a faith-based recovery program. Google it. Just Google faith-based recovery program, recovery.com. And if you really need an intervention, as an intervention professional, you can hire an intervention professional to fly out to their house, talk to the addict, talk to the child, talk to the teenager, whoever it is, and get them to convince them to go to rehab and get help. The whole family will sit down, talk to each other, have a heart-to-heart moment, and they'll get the addict help and get them on the right path. And some of them offer up to a year of counseling, a year of therapy and recovery coaching. And those are a little more expensive, but you can get an intervention professional to help guide you through all this, right? So there's always hope. There's always chance. There's always a possibility and chance for change, a positive change. And there's also even like positive change hypnosis. If you have limiting beliefs, I can't do this, it's too difficult. It's like I have these issues or whatever. It's like, well, positive change hypnosis. You can do anything, right? You're the man, you're the woman, right? You're a woman, car salesman, whatever it is. I'm smart, I'm educated, intellectual, I'm intelligent. I could do this work. I could study. I could get tutoring. Just never give up. Never give up. Whatever it is, try again. Get tutoring. If it's school, tutor. New job, apply for 1,000 jobs. Apply for 1,000. If those don't work out, apply for another 2,000 jobs. You will get a good job that pays well. Just keep trying, keep applying. Never give up hope. Never give up trying. Try your best. And in college, just keep getting tutoring. Study as much as you can. If you fail, try again, right? Try as much as you can. And if you have to pivot, if you have to do something else, do something like manual labor or another work, another job, whatever it is, to support your family, just pivot to another direction. You might have changed, your path, but you're still not giving up. You're never giving up. In the Marine Corps, in the military, you can never give up on a hike. You will die. You can't leave your friend behind. You can't leave a buddy behind. Never leave a soldier behind. And never give up. Just never give up.
Great advice, especially that last bit right there. Never give up. There's always something out there. I say this all the time for folks who might say, oh, I've tried everything. I've tried all these different programs. I've tried different services. I've tried all the things. And for whatever it is that they're going through, whether it's mental health issues, physical health issues, they're maybe a drug addiction or alcohol dependency or something along those lines, that whatever it is that they're going through, and they say, I've tried it all. I've tried everything. I just can't seem to get past whatever my issue is. Trust me, there's something else out there. There's so many things. Just keep trying things and never give up. No matter what the situation is that you're going through, you've survived all this way. Like you were saying before, every day is a battle, between life and death, is essentially, right? And you've survived all the way up till today, and you have another tomorrow in you, and tomorrow after that, and after that, and after that. Keep trying those things. Keep looking for things too. And that's part of the reason why this show exists, is to share resources like the ones that you've been talking about today, with folks who maybe just didn't realize that some of these resources even existed. Well, here they are. Now you have no excuse. You know that they exist. So let let's get it done. Let's get yourself into some of these programs, and figure out the best way to help yourself. And you try one thing and it doesn't work, doesn't mean you give up and you just quit on it. You try something else, and then that doesn't work. Okay, try something else, and just keep trying until you figure out what works for you. There's no one size fits all solution out there. Everyone's going to need different things based on their unique set of circumstances that they're going through, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can try different things, and just because something worked for me or worked for you or worked for the next person doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work for whoever's listening right now. But keep trying. You'll find something at some point, and don't give up. I think that's maybe the key takeaway from this episode, is kind of waited to the end to drop that. But don't give up. Don't quit on yourself, essentially, or your family or loved ones or friends, anyone like that who depend on you. Just by giving up, you're quitting on them too, and that's not fair to them, especially like you said, if you have kids. Those kids are looking up to you and depending on you, and they need you to be the best version of yourself so that they can become the best versions of themselves. And that's what I think any parent is going to want for their kids, is to have a better life than what the parents had. And so figure out a way to do it. If not for yourself, do it for them, and just figure it out. And there's people like yourself and lots of other folks out there who are willing to step up and help and point people in the right direction, help them themselves if they need to, and do all the things that maybe someone with a not operating with a clear mind is able to do for themselves. So ask for help. That's no shame in that, asking for help, and find somebody who can, like you said, a fire team that can kind of walk with you and make sure that you're getting through these struggles in the best way possible. So this has been a great conversation, for the listeners who might be interested in finding out more about your program, the recovery protocol, and the stuff that you have to offer. Could you just remind folks where they can go to find more information about that?
Therecoveryprotocol.org.
Great.
Therecoveryprotocol.org.
Perfect.
And that has the link to my Patreon account. There'll be just free links, free resources. There'll be a button on the top, near the top, to where all the videos are free, right? And there'll be a link to my YouTube channel. Rumble, it's just more me speaking my voice and being outspoken and kind of venting and having a journal. But it's something I also like. I vlog, but the recovery coaching main content, the recoveryprotocol.org.
Perfect.
And I also want to say, like, this is my favorite Bible, the NKJV Study Bible. See that New King James Version of Study Bible for anyone. Pick up a good Bible. Start going to church, your local community. But that's the website, sir.
Perfect. And appreciate you sharing that version of the Bible as well. I agree. Finding a good version that you can stick with is important. And especially people who are picking it up for the first time, finding that good version is always a good first step. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, sharing the resources that you did, sharing what it is that you do, and how you got there. I think it's an important part of what you're doing is your journey to getting there, so that other folks know that, hey, you know what, I might have this issue that I'm dealing with, but there's hope for me too. You know, if he can do it, maybe I can do it too. And not maybe, but you can do it too. You know, and that's I think a great takeaway too. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your background and the resources and everything. It's definitely been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you very much, sir.